Hello, this is Rebecca McCarthy for South Seattle Community College and CMST 245 Online. Welcome back to part 2 of our discussion regarding Rhetoric Online, the circulation and rhetorical uptake of viral videos. Now, we left off of trying to define this term rhizomatic, and I'm trying to pronounce it the way it is spelled, and I may be mispronouncing it. But that takes me to another point in the discussion. How do we deal with jargon or with words that not only make no sense to us, but that seem almost impossible to pronounce? So what do, especially if you are in a face-to-face situation, for example, and let's say you have to talk with other people in the class? Well, one of the things I like to do is when I'm looking up the definition of the word, I like to take advantage of the internet and the fact that the internet gives us all these fantastic tools in order to better understand terms and concepts. For example, if you go to dictionary.com and you look for the definition of the word, you will also see a little speaker symbol on there that actually allows you to hear how the term is pronounced. And I'm pushing it now.
Rhizome.
Rhizome. So we actually have these fantastic tools in which will help us with our research, not only understanding terms, but how the terms are pronounced and the whole 9 yards. And I wanted to take a little moment to introduce you to that idea so that you can use it while you are working through these chapters. So let's get back to the content of the chapter, shall we? The next term that we come up with that is kind of difficult to understand is this concept of consubstantiality. And this is a term that is often used by, and it actually originates especially for rhetorical theory, with Kenneth Burke. And you've heard me talk about Kenneth Burke before. And we talked about his idea of identification, and that the term identification, that's the point of rhetoric or persuading somebody, right? I want to have you identify with my cause so that you'll agree with me. And if I can make it so that you identify with my cause really, really, really well and specifically, then you and I might reach this plateau of consubstantiality. That means me and you have become almost one. And the term itself is related to the idea of the Trinity in Christian theology, so that we become one of the same substance or essence. And that's the concept of the term. And again, what I did is I took this term, and I went to Google and I said, define consubstantiality for me. I found out where the origin of the term comes from. And although that the authors doesn't tell me it comes from Kenneth Burke, we will find that out later on as we read this particular book a little bit more. So what I'm trying to show you is that there are a couple interesting processes. Again, we are finding how we can start to define this jargon and these terms, and at the same time, the authors are doing a very good job at showing us how to go about the process as well. It's just such an important skill, I think, for us all to develop. So when we look at viral videos, the idea that we become of the same substance or the same agreement with the videos allow us to actually interact with the videos in a certain way, and then also promotes us to circulate those videos as well. And circulation is extremely important. Now, we come to an important term now for this particular chapter, and indeed the chapter is partly defined, or that is labeled as circulation and rhetorical uptake, this idea of uptake. And the idea of uptake can be found on page 66. The author writes, "The study of uptake is to move from studying the features and nuisances of discourse as it occurs in an event to studying the effects and uses of that discourse in new contexts." That is, discourse or language or a text may arise because of a certain circumstance. But what happens after that text has arisen? What happens next? What happens when that text is reconceived in a different kind of location or idea? If we look, for example, at the I Am Not a Witch video, okay, we're going back to chapter 2. One of the interesting things is that the video started out as a way to explain a point of view, a political point of view, and then it was taken up as a parody. And uptake then means that we're not only studying the original video and its purpose, but we're also studying what happens to that video later on as it is sent out into the world, okay? We come up to another, I think, difficult term, postmodern. Now, this term is important because it's used a lot in this textbook, but you will also find that this term will be used a great deal in almost any studies of the humanities that you end up encountering. So, what does it mean? Well, let's look at just a basic definition in the dictionary. 1. Postmodern, date 1925. Of, relating to, or being an era after the modern one, postmodern times. 2a, of, relating to, or being any of the various movements in reaction to modernism that are typically characterized by a return to traditional materials and forms, as in architecture, or by ironic self-reference and absurdity. B, of relating to or being a theory that involves radical reprisal of modern assumptions about culture, identity, history, or language. And it is that particular definition that is going to concern us. The idea simply is this. Within the modern time, it was suggested that we lived under a unified message or philosophy that brought us all together. This was an assumption. It probably wasn't always true, but the idea that we could all relate under a fairly unified concept or term of our place in life, how we function within our country, in our nation, in our communities, and within our family seem to be somewhat unified. And then there is a point in time where this unification starts to break away, and it's called the postmodern time. And the authors are referring to our reaction against modernism, and that in our own new society, instead of having a unified message, we're saying, no, I'm not that message, I am my own message. I am a feminist message, or I am a gay and lesbian message. We have this fragmentation, right? And we say, no, there are many different narratives in the world to describe who and how and what I am. And many theorists will say that these offshoots of these many different narratives that we use to describe who we are and how we live life become fragmented in nature, that it fragments us against or away from each other because we are no longer brought together under a unified message. Now this is a very simple way, I think, of me trying to explain postmodern to you, but it's good enough right now for our efforts. And I think it's important to know that this term actually is a contested term, one that scholars discuss a great deal, but in our particular focus, you'll see that the idea of postmodern is used a lot with this idea of fragmentation, especially on the internet. So I'm hoping this quick definition will help us better understand this chapter. So going back to this idea of definition again, as I said, that the authors define this idea of a viral video in 3 different ways. And so a video needs to meet 3 different criteria in order to be a viral video. And then they give us this example of Lady Gaga's Don't Ask, Don't Tell campaign, in which they apply the 3 different levels to this particular video. And I'm going to let you go ahead and go through that, but you could see how they're using a concrete example in order to prove their definition of viral videos. The second part of this chapter talks about how viral videos often work in circulation a little bit like an internet meme. And you'll see, interesting again, that they offer us 3 different definitions of an internet meme, starting on page 71 with its original definition given to us in the 1970s by biologist Richard Dawkins, and then how it applies to the internet and rhetorical studies, and then how it is defined within modern internet culture with what Port 80 gives us a definition. So you'll want to look over how that definition changes over time. What is interesting about this particular chapter is they discuss very specifically this idea of circulation. If you remember, I think back in the first or second podcast, I talked a lot about this idea of the interactive audience, how the one thing the internet has given us is the ability of an audience to be part of the process and part of the effort to create and promote content that we find important. And internet memes and viral videos would not exist unless us as the audience also took a hand in circulating the content. And this part of the chapter looks at how this type of circulation is related to the idea of an internet meme and the importance of circulation not only happening from a small few individuals, such as we may see with newscasts or newspaper articles, but rather with all of us individuals who want to be able to bring that content out and circulate it around. So the authors spend a good amount of time understanding this idea of the meme and how it is affected by viral videos, and also how it relates to what we call postmodern culture, the fragmented nature of circulation. And I'm going to end my podcast here. I hope that this podcast series this week has been helpful to you, not only with understanding the content of our chapter this week, but also understanding the importance of the use of definitions in most of the academic writing. And this gives you, again, this particular chapter, one fantastic way in which to incorporate how to define terms and ideas for your final project. And that's it. Thank you very much for joining me this week, and I look forward to seeing you on the discussion boards. Until then, goodbye.